The Joshua Tree Desert is larger than some states, and people rarely get lost in it. Almost everyone who heads out for the day makes it back by evening. Bill Owasco did not. 66 years old, a Vietnam veteran, a runner, and an experienced hiker. He left his girlfriend a precise itinerary, parked his car at the park entrance, and set off on a day-long hike. 3 days later, his phone pinged once. The signal came from a location so far from his planned route that search and rescue teams dismissed it as a system error and continued searching where they had been all along. He wasn't found after a week, nor after a year. They searched for him for nearly 12 years, and when they finally found him, it turned out he had been lying the entire time in a place no one thought to look, and no one could explain why he was there. Bill Owasco was the type of person to whom the word lost applied the least. He was 66, but he carried himself like a man much younger. He had served in the military, survived Vietnam, and the Army-instilled habit of order had stayed with him his whole life. He ran often, loved being on his feet, and knew what a long trek felt like, and how the body behaves when its strength is spent. That summer, he didn't have a single serious illness, nothing that could have failed him on the trail. He lived in Marietta, a suburb of Atlanta, with his girlfriend. His life was steady, without sudden turns, and the California desert held a special place in it. This wasn't his first time in Joshua Tree. He had visited before, walked its trails, and knew what the park looked like at different times of day and what made it dangerous. Those who knew Bill would later repeat the same thing. He was cautious. He wasn't the type to head into the desert light and on a whim. He planned. He rationed his water. He left his loved ones a schedule and kept his word when he promised to call. That is precisely why everything that happened next is so hard to wrap one's head around. When a novice goes missing, there is a simple explanation. When a man who knew the rules and followed them goes missing, there is no simple explanation left. That time, he set off for California alone. Bill flew out west in June 2010. The plan was standard for him. A few days in the desert, walks through familiar spots, the road, the silence, the dry air. Joshua Tree lies east of Los Angeles, at the junction of two deserts, and covers an area of over 1,200 square miles. It is a territory the size of a small country. Rocky ridges, dry washes, groves of the yucca trees that gave the park its name, and rare trails that quickly vanish among the boulders. The park is deceptive. It looks inhabited. Paved roads lead to it. Signs stand at the entrances, and on weekends it is full of cars and people with cameras. But step just a few miles off the beaten path, and a person is left one-on-one with terrain that does not forgive mistakes. The main mistake involves water. In the summer, it hits over 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. There's almost no shade. The water a tourist carries is only enough for half a day. Everything else is a debt they are running up against their own body. In such heat, a person loses moisture faster than they can notice, and by the time they do notice, it is often too late. Yet people rarely die in Joshua Tree, and they get lost even less often. Most accidents here are related to rock climbing or falls on the rocks. But for a person to walk into the park and not be found, that happens extremely rarely. The desert is big, but not so big that an adult, experienced man could dissolve into it without a trace in front of hundreds of rescuers. The terrain here plays a simple game with people. Ridges of boulders look the same from every side, and each subsequent stone crest resembles the last. Dry washes, which are easy to walk along, branch off and lead you astray, and anyone who trusts them will, without realizing it, drift a mile or two off course. By noon, the heat rises from the rocks below, and there is almost no shade left, except for narrow strips right against the boulders. A person who is tired and wants to take a shortcut chooses what seems shorter. And in this desert, that choice costs more than anywhere else. Bill intended to hike one of the trails leading to Quail Mountain, the highest point in the park. The road to it starts from the parking lot at the Juniper Flats trailhead, a common starting point for those heading in that direction. He knew the route. He knew the terrain. Nothing in this plan went beyond what he had done before. June 24th, 2010 was a typical day in the desert. In the morning, Bill drove to the park. He prepared as he always did. He took lunch, water, and some snacks. He left his girlfriend the schedule he intended to follow, and they agreed he would call in the evening. His return to the car and the call were set for 5 p.m. It was their agreement, and for Bill, it meant exactly what it meant. He was a man of his word. If he said at 5, he called at 5. He left his rental car, a white Chrysler Sebring, at the trailhead parking lot. Beyond that began the trail, and beyond that, his trail in this story becomes as thin as a thread. No one knows exactly what time he started the hike. No one saw which specific path he took or where he turned. From this moment on, everything we have is no longer observation, but reconstruction. It was a clear, hot day. That week, the temperature in the park was climbing toward 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The air shimmered over the rocks, and on such days, the horizon seems closer than it is. Bill walked where he had walked before, through places he recognized. At 5 p.m., his girlfriend's phone did not ring. At first, this could be explained by 1,000 little things. Reception in the desert is fickle. The signal is caught on high ground and disappears in the ravines. A person could be delayed on the trail, get distracted, or miscalculate the time for the return trip. Experienced hikers are just as likely to be late as novices, and in the first hour, such a delay is not yet a cause for alarm, just a delay. But hour after hour passed. Evening came, then night. The phone remained silent. On the morning of June 25th toward noon, Bill's girlfriend reported him missing. By this time, nearly a full day had passed since the hour he was supposed to call. A man who never broke his commitments, had not checked in, and had shown no signs of life for an entire night. For those who knew him, that was enough to understand. This wasn't about a dead battery or losing track of time. Park rangers started with the obvious. They had the schedule Bill had left, and based on that schedule, they checked the trailheads he might have started from. They looked for his car. They didn't find it immediately. Only in the second half of the day on June 26th did a California Highway Patrol helicopter spot the white sedan in the Juniper Flats parking lot. It was the very trailhead from which the road to Quail Mountain begins, and it was listed in Bill's plans. The car was where it was supposed to be, locked in its spot, with no signs of haste or struggle. It communicated exactly one thing. Bill had walked from here into the desert and had not returned to it. Where he turned, how far he went, and what happened to him on the route, the car didn't say. From that point in the parking lot, the countdown for the real search began. Search teams focused their attention on the areas reachable from Juniper Flats, and primarily on Quail Mountain. The logic was simple and sound. Here's the parking lot. Here's the declared route. Here's the mountain he was heading toward. The man is somewhere on this stretch. That is what everyone thought. And this logic, clear and almost flawless, would very soon collide with a fact that didn't fit into it. By the evening of June 26th, the search for Bill Iwasko ceased to be the private anxiety of one person and became the business of many. The car was found in the afternoon, and from that moment, a mechanism that had been refined over years in California was activated. Joshua Tree, for all its deceptive habitability, remains wild territory, and local rescue services know what it means to search for a person in such heat. Time here works against the missing person faster than anywhere else. The body loses water, strength fades, and every day without water in 104 degrees Fahrenheit heat cuts the chances in half. Therefore, They reacted without delay. Park rangers, sheriff's deputies, and search and rescue teams from all over Southern California joined the search. Ground teams went out into the terrain. Helicopters took to the sky. Dogs were brought in. Horses were brought in. And a small plane was working in the air. This wasn't a formal check of a couple of trails, but a real operation. There were many people and plenty of equipment, and they all operated from the same reasonable premise. Here is the Juniper Flats parking lot. Here is the declared route to Quail Mountain. Here is the mountain. Bill is somewhere on this stretch. An experienced man who left for the day couldn't have gone too far. It is worth pausing on how much time had already been lost by this point. Bill was supposed to call at 5 p.m. on the 24th. The disappearance was reported around noon on the 25th. The car was found only in the second half of the day on the 26th. Between the last hour when Bill was still expected and the start of the real search, nearly 2 full days had passed. 2 days in a desert where water supplies run out in half a day. No one was to blame for this. Until the car was found, they didn't even know which of the entrances to the massive park to search. But the desert does not hear these excuses. For it, 2 days is simply 2 days under the sun. In the first hours of the search, this logic did not raise the slightest doubt. It was correct. It relied on everything known about Bill, his plans, and how people who get lost in the desert behave. And yet, the longer they combed the slopes of Quail Mountain, the more insistently one simple circumstance emerged. There was no one there. The search expanded, and with it, the map expanded. Rescuers worked as they always do in such cases. The terrain was divided into squares, each square assigned to a team, and the teams moved in lines, combing the slopes and washes step by step. Helicopters flew over the area, looking for anything on the rocks that might give a person away. A bright patch of clothing, movement, a glint. Dogs followed the trails, trying to catch a scent. In the desert, such work is especially difficult. The heat exhausts the rescuers just as much as it would have exhausted the missing person. The rocks heat up, and thermal imagers, which in other conditions help find people by body heat, are almost useless here. The scorching rock glows on its own. Scent does not hold well in the dry, hot air, and dogs lose the trail where they would have followed it confidently in a forest or mountains. This kind of operation has its own headquarters, its own routine, and its own accounting of effort. Someone keeps a map and colors in the areas already covered. Someone else schedules shifts because people burn out quickly in the heat and teams need to be rotated. Someone else reconciles reports from the air and the ground, checking to see if any blind spots remain. From the outside, it looks dry, almost bureaucratic. But behind every colored-in square are people who spend hours walking over scorching rocks, peering into every crevice. Days turned into weeks of effort. They combed the slopes of Quail Mountain. They combed the ravines and washes around the trailhead. They checked areas reachable from the parking lot within a single day's hike. They peered into canyons where a tired person might have turned in search of shade. They inspected the shady pockets under cliffs where an exhausted traveler would wait out the heat, and the dry washes that offer the easiest path downward. They found nothing. No belongings, no tracks, no scraps of clothing, not a single sign that Bill had even passed through these parts. For experienced search and rescue teams, this in itself was strange. A person walking through the desert leaves tracks. They sit down to rest, drop something, wander off the trail, or leave footprints in the sand of a dry wash. Missing persons are almost always found within a reasonable radius because you can't get very far on foot in a single day, especially in such heat, and especially at 66 years old. But here, the reasonable radius turned out to be empty. Bill wasn't in it, and that meant one of two things. Either they missed him where he was lying, or he wasn't where he was supposed to be at all. The answer, it seemed, arrived on its own. Only it didn't clarify the picture, it shattered it. On Sunday, June 27th, at 6:50 a.m., Bill Iwasko's phone briefly flickered to life. It connected to a cell tower and then went silent again. It lasted only seconds, a single point of contact, after which the phone never responded again. The tower was located on Sarin Drive in the town of Yucca Valley, northwest of the park. This signal was a treasure in itself. It proved that 3 days after his disappearance, Bill's phone was still powered on and working somewhere. It was the first lead since the moment his car was found. But when specialists estimated where that signal could have come from, the lead tied itself into a knot. A brief explanation is needed here. When a phone connects to a tower, the signal characteristics can be used to estimate the distance from that tower. It doesn't provide an exact location, but it does provide a radius, a circle somewhere along which the device was located. In Bill's case, this radius was about 10.6 miles from the tower on Sarin Drive. And that's where everything stopped adding up. 10 plus miles from that tower led far beyond Quail Mountain, in the opposite direction from where they had been searching. The closest point of that radius lay in a direction contrary to the logic of Bill's route and contrary to where he was heading from his car. It turned out that on Sunday morning, 3 days after setting out for a day hike, Bill's phone was not where a person heading toward Quail Mountain should have been. It was much further away and in a completely different direction. The searchers did the only thing they could. They redeployed their forces to that new area and sent the helicopters up again. They combed that terrain, too. The Sunday morning signal was like a flashlight beam in the dark. For the first time in days, there was at least some direction, and they worked it with all possible thoroughness. If the phone was there, then the person was there, and a person who showed a sign of life on the third day could still be alive. And again, they found nothing. Thus, a detail appeared in the case that would haunt them for many years to come. The signal existed. It pointed somewhere very far away, and in that distance, just like here, there was neither Bill nor his tracks. One short contact at dawn, and then silence again. The longer the case dragged on, the less it yielded to a simple explanation. At first, the signal itself was called into question. Some searchers were inclined to believe it was a glitch. A reflected signal, a phantom, a technical coincidence. It seemed too impossible that an elderly man, without enough water, could have walked so far off his route in 3 days without ever making himself known earlier, even though he surely must have crossed areas where the phone could have caught a signal. But the more carefully they analyzed the data, the harder it was to dismiss the signal as an error. Later, specialists who took the case seriously concluded that the ping was most likely real and quite accurate. And if it was real, the question became even more pressing. How did Bill get there? Why was the phone silent for 3 days, only to speak up once at dawn and then go silent forever? Why didn't the signal come through earlier, when Bill, by all calculations, should have been passing through areas with reliable coverage? Every answer brought a new question. The theory that the signal reflected off a slope, making the radius deceptive, explained the distance, but didn't fit well with the fact that coverage in those parts was decent, and the phone should have registered much earlier. The theory that Bill really did go in that direction explained the signal, but hit a wall of physical impossibility. Too far, too hot, and too long for a man his age without water. They tried to tackle the mystery from another angle, not with feet, but with numbers. Specialists later joined the case, applying mathematical models, the same ones used to search for missing ships in the ocean, or to estimate the most likely location of someone lost in the mountains. They combined everything known: the location of the car, the park boundaries, roads and trails, the maximum distance a person could walk, terrain features that block cellular signals, and that very ping radius. From all this data, they built a probability map, with areas colored from least to most promising. Curiously, the areas of highest probability, according to these calculations, lay north of Quail Mountain. But those areas have been combed, and they too remain silent. The calculation pointed to where they should look. The terrain did not confirm the calculation. The more layers added to the case, the denser it became, and the less simplicity remained. The strangeness of Bill Owasco's case wasn't in one striking piece of evidence, but in the very absence of evidence where it was supposed to be. The car was in place. The route was known. The signal radius was outlined. The terrain was combed by foot chains, flown over from the air and calculated on paper. And in the middle of all this, at the center of the converging lines, there was absolutely nothing. No person, no body, no belongings, save for one bandana over all these years. Meanwhile, the official search was reaching its limit. It had been conducted on a massive scale, day after day, but the desert gave up nothing. On July 5th, about 11 days after Bill hit the trail, the active phase of the search was called off. This decision pleased no one, but the logic behind it was sober. A man had left for a single day with half a day's worth of water. More than a week had passed under the scorching sun. There was no hope left of finding him alive by this point. And finding his body in an area the size of a small country, without even knowing which direction he had gone, was a nearly hopeless task. The search camps were dismantled. The equipment was hauled out. The searchers returned to other calls, of which there are always plenty in their line of work. But the case didn't end there. It only changed form. The departure of official services didn't mean they stopped looking for Bill. It meant that now they were looking for him differently. Among those who couldn't let the case go was a man named Tom Mahood, a former engineer and a former volunteer with a mountain rescue team. He was known in narrow circles for one rare stroke of luck. A few years prior, he had managed to find the remains of a group of German tourists in Death Valley who had gone missing years before and were considered unfindable. He knew how to do exactly what was needed now, methodically, stubbornly, year after year, to search for a person in terrain that seemed to have hidden him forever. Mahood took on Bill's case as a personal mission. He went out into the desert again and again, expedition after expedition, and recorded each one in a detailed report. He overlaid his routes on maps, noted where he had already been, drew that same ping radius from the Sarin Drive Tower, and tried to understand which places that radius allowed for and which it excluded. He calculated how far a person could walk, where a radio signal could have reflected off a slope, and in which pocket of terrain a body could have lain unnoticed. Dozens of such outings. Hundreds of miles walked on foot in the same heat that had once met Bill. He kept his notes so detailed that one could trace his train of thought from expedition to expedition. Here he thought one place was promising. There he grew disappointed in it. And here he switched to a new angle. Sometimes he went to check even those spots suggested by outsiders, including those who claimed to see the missing person's location with a special inner vision. Mahood checked that too, not because he believed it, but because he didn't want to miss anything. Others joined him, people just as captivated by the mystery, and an entire community formed around the case, people who continued to think about the missing hiker years after the newspapers had forgotten him. On the forum dedicated to the case, hundreds upon hundreds of messages accumulated over the years. In all those years, the desert gave them exactly one item: a bandana. Nothing else that could be linked to Bill was ever found. And this is where it's worth stopping to think. A man who had once already found the unfindable joined the search. He dedicated years to the case. He combed the terrain inside and out, with maps, calculations, and experience. Others worked alongside him, and they didn't find him. Not in the first year, not in the 5th, not in the 10th. Gradually, the the hope of finding anything at all thinned to almost zero. The case moved into the category of what they call cold, open but dead, with no new leads, no movement. Bill Owasco turned into a name on enthusiast forums and a line in lists of unsolved national park disappearances. Logically, everything pointed to the fact that he had long been dead and was lying somewhere in that desert, in one of the thousands of places no searcher had reached. It was a sober, rational assumption, and it was almost certainly correct. There was only one small detail that this assumption didn't cover. If he had been here the whole time, within the radius, within the area that had been combed through high and low, then why hadn't he been found even once in 12 years? Over the years, several explanations emerged regarding Bill Owasco's disappearance. None of them ever became definitive. Each had its own proponents, its own arguments, and its own weak point where it stumbled. The official stance of those leading the search was reserved. Bill was considered almost certainly deceased somewhere in the park, most likely as a result of an accident involving heat and dehydration. It wasn't so much a solved picture as it was the most cautious of assumptions. A man left, didn't return, and in such weather at that age, the outcome is usually the same. The investigation didn't name suspects, didn't press charges, and didn't insist on details because there were no details. There was the fact of the disappearance and the desert surrounding it. The simplest and most rational version was this: an accident. An experienced but older man set out on a hot trail, miscalculated his strength or water supply somewhere, took a wrong turn, maybe fell, maybe his heart gave out or heat stroke set in. Dehydration in the desert acts insidiously. It clouds the mind, and a person who has lost clarity of thought begins to make wrong decisions. They head in the wrong direction, lose the trail, wander into a ravine from which they cannot escape. Search and rescue teams know this scenario by heart because it repeats year after year in hot regions all over the world. First, the person gets tired, then they stop sweating, then they stop thinking clearly, and by the end, they are no longer the person who set out on the trail that morning. Everything known about the location and the weather supported this version. Only one thing, but a major one, spoke against it. For 12 years, the body was never found where this accident should have occurred. There was a theory that Bill simply went much further than anyone thought possible. That in a confused state, driven by thirst, he walked many miles away from the route. And that is why his phone pinged so far from the tower. This version explained the ping, but it required believing that a 66-year-old man without a sufficient water supply covered a distance in 104 degrees Fahrenheit heat that would have been difficult even for a fit, young hiker. A separate branch of theories was tied to the signal itself. Some believed that a radius of over 10 miles was deceptive because the signal could have bounced off a slope and reached the tower distorted. In that case, Bill was closer than it seemed, and he should have been searched for not so far away. Others countered. Experts who carefully analyzed the data concluded that the signal was likely quite accurate. And if it was accurate, then the phone really was somewhere on that distant arc on Sunday morning, and the only question then is how it got there. Whether it was Bill himself, still alive on the third day, or just the phone left lying somewhere, was impossible to determine. There were also explanations that led away from a simple accident. Since any unnatural death with no obvious causes is formally supposed to be treated as a possible homicide, this line of inquiry also surfaced. According to one such version, someone else's will could have been involved in the disappearance. Someone Bill met on the deserted trail. There were no direct indications of this, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no motive. The version relied not on evidence, but on the very absence of a body, which someone had supposedly hidden intentionally, where it wouldn't be looked for. Its weakness was obvious. It explained the void, But it wasn't based on a single fact other than that void. There was also the thought that Bill might have left intentionally, to cut off his old life and start a new one. Such versions almost always arise when a person disappears without a trace. But it didn't fit Bill well. He had no debts, no visible reasons for fleeing, and no signs that he was preparing for it. He left a detailed itinerary, promised to call, and was a man who kept his word. People who plan to disappear forever don't leave like that. But furthermore, Bill's preparation, experience, and character worked against this version. A man accustomed to calculating everything wouldn't have left behind such a chaos of contradictions if he had simply wanted to leave. A more down-to-earth hunch arose that Bill first tried one route, then changed his mind, decided to return to his car by a different path, and got lost on that detour. This thought explained why he wasn't where they expected him to be, and why his phone pinged in an unexpected direction. But even this didn't fully add up, because the detour still didn't lead as far as the signal showed. And finally, there remained a version that wasn't even a version in the strict sense. It was more of an admission that no single explanation covered the case entirely. Too many things didn't add up, a signal that came from an impossible distance and never repeated. A void where there should have been tracks. The silence of terrain that had been combed through by the best searchers. Those who had spent years in this desert threw up their hands. A rational explanation surely existed, but none of those at hand aligned with all the facts at once. Here, the main rule of this story should be stated. Not one of the versions was proven. No one was implicated in anything. All that exists is a set of possibilities, each of which explains a part and fails to explain the rest. Time did to this case what it does to all such cases. It carried it away from the news, from conversations, and from memory. At first, they wrote about Owasco. The story made it into newspapers. His name appeared in major publications, even the largest in the country. Journalists returned to the case from time to time, especially when another detail about the mysterious signal or the persistence of a man who continued to search alone surfaced. Each such piece briefly made Bill's name familiar again, and then interest faded once more. Then interest faded altogether, as it always does, and Bill's place in the headlines was taken by other missing persons, other anxieties. For the general public, the desert became just a beautiful place again, where people go to photograph yuccas at sunset. But the case itself had its own small circle that wouldn't let it go. Tom Mahood continued to go out into the desert and keep records. On a forum dedicated to Bill, discussions went on for years, theories accumulated, and maps were posted. For his loved ones, these were years without an answer. A man went for a day hike and didn't return, and there was no grave, no site to visit, and no end that would allow them to close this chapter. Such waiting has its own special weight. When a person dies in front of you, there is grief, but there is also a certainty to hold on to. When a person disappears, neither remains. There is only an open door that you stare into for years, not knowing whether to wait. In such circumstances, some continue to search until the very end, while others force themselves to let go in order to live on. And both paths are equally difficult. Search outings became less frequent over time. Season after season, the desert remained empty, and even the most persistent realized that the probability of finding anything at all was approaching zero. The terrain, which had once been walked by searchers in lines, had long returned to its usual state. Tourists on the trails, silence off the trails. No signs that a major operation had once unfolded here. The story became part of local memory, one of those tales told in hushed tones. A man went missing somewhere around here, and he was never found. The case lay in the cold category, open but stagnant. Without new leads, it could have remained that way indefinitely, and everything pointed to Bill Owasco remaining just a name on a list of those the desert took and never returned. And then, after almost 12 years, it returned him. On February 8th, 2022, two people were walking in the northwest corner of the park, not far from the Panorama Loop Trail. They were ordinary visitors, a mother and son, who happened to be there with no connection to the long-standing story. They weren't looking for Bill. They most likely didn't even know his name. Among the rocks, they saw human remains. This is perhaps the most bitter irony of the entire story. For 12 years, people armed with maps, calculations, experience, and technology searched for him and didn't find him. And he was found by those who weren't looking at all, who were just passing by on an ordinary winter day. Nearby lay a wallet. Inside were documents in the name of Bill Owasco. After nearly 12 years, the question of dead or alive was closed. Bill was dead, and had clearly been dead for a very long time. The remains were old. Given how much time had passed, the cause of death will likely never be established. As per standard procedure, the case was initially opened as a possible homicide, simply because any death without obvious causes is processed that way. But this was a procedure, not an indication of anyone's guilt. What remained of Bill had lain under the open sky for 12 years. The sun, wind, temperature fluctuations, and desert animals do their work quickly, and after such a time, little remains of a person. That is precisely why the wallet turned out to be more important than anything else. The documents inside provided a name where the remains themselves could no longer say almost anything. Without that wallet, the find would have remained nameless for a long time, one of those that end up in reports as unidentified. The family finally received what they had been deprived of for 12 years. Not an answer. An end. By that time, Bill Owasco's case had long since ceased to be just a line in a police report. Over the years, it had turned into one of those stories that live their own lives in a circle of people fascinated by the mysteries of the wilderness. Detailed search reports posted online were read and reread. A whole body of analysis formed. Articles, videos, and long discussions in which people who had never known Bill argued about trajectories, radii, and probabilities as if they were talking about a loved one. Some came into this story out of curiosity and stayed for years. For many, it became an example of how difficult it can be to find one person in terrain that seems small on a map, but proves endless underfoot. And so, to this community, accustomed to the case being at a standstill, came the news of the discovery. But along with the end came a new question, and it proved to be heavier than the previous ones. The place where Bill was found was not where he had been searched for. It lay far from his stated route, in a direction that didn't align with his plans, with logic, or with how far a person on foot could travel in such sweltering heat. The man who had spent years looking for Bill studied the map of the discovery and said it plainly. It was a very strange place for him to be, and he couldn't understand what Bill was doing there. Yet, he also admitted something else. He had always said Bill would be found where no one thought to look. To be certain this was truly the spot, he even pulled the flight path data for the helicopter that responded to the report of the remains and cross-referenced the coordinates. There was no doubt left. Bill was lying there in the northwest corner, and the words about him being found in the most unexpected place had come true with eerie precision. And this is where the story returns to its central crux. For 12 years, the area was combed by search and rescue teams, volunteers, helicopters, and dogs. For 12 years, a man who had once already found the unfindable walked that terrain with maps and calculations. And then, two random hikers stumbled upon the remains in a corner of the park. If Bill had been lying there the whole time, how is it that in 12 years, Not one of those who were specifically looking for him stumbled upon him. And if we consider the alternative, that he wasn't there the whole time, then a question arises that has no answer and never will. Where was he? And how did he end up where he was found? There is a rational explanation, and it cannot be dismissed. The desert is vast, the rugged terrain hides much, and search parties, for all their thoroughness, cannot cover every meter. The corner where Bill was found could simply have been outside the primary search grids. Too far off, too illogical to waste resources on when there were more probable locations. Remains that have spent years under the open sky get lost among rocks of the same color, and walking within a few meters without noticing them is easier than it seems. The body could have lain in such a pocket for all 12 years, and it wasn't found simply because no one looked there in earnest. This explanation is sober, and it is most likely the correct one, and yet it leaves unresolved the very thing that didn't add up from the start. A signal from a distance a person couldn't have reached. Years of empty searches in a well-trodden area. A sudden discovery in a place where, logically, there was no reason to look. Each of these facts can be explained individually. Taken together, they still refuse to form a single, coherent picture. Joshua Tree remains as it was. The same ridges of boulders, the same dry washes, the same yucca, the same heat that met Bill in June of 2010. On weekends, people come here with cameras, walking the panorama loop, unaware that nearby, for 12 years, lay a man whom half of Southern California had been searching for. Bill Iwasco was found. What happened to him that day and how he ended up where he did, no one still knows.